Sweat clung to the air in Atlanta's federal courtroom that sticky August night as Assistant U.S. Attorney Victor Grayson smirked, jabbing a finger at Tanya Brooks, a quiet black woman in the gallery. "What's she gonna do, testify from the peanut gallery?" he sneered, sparking chuckles. Then Tanya rose, her steely gaze slicing through the room, silencing every snicker. Grayson's smugness faltered. She wasn't just a nobody, and this moment would unravel Jamal Carter's trial and Grayson's life forever. What had he just unleashed? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. The late summer sun hung low over Atlanta, casting a hazy golden glow across the city's sprawling skyline as the clock ticked towards 6 in the evening. Inside the towering federal courthouse on Spring Street, the air buzzed with the hum of anticipation, thick with humidity that stuck to the skin like a second layer. Courtroom 12 buzzed with a restless crowd, their murmurs bouncing off the high ceilings, the wooden benches creaking under the weight of spectators drawn by whispers of a juicy case. At the center of it all sat Jamal Carter, a wiry man of 32 with close-cropped hair and tired brown eyes that flickered nervously between his hands, clasped tight in his lap. He wore a navy suit jacket, borrowed from his cousin, the sleeves a touch too long, draping over his wrists as he shifted in the defendant's chair. Beside him, a stack of papers sat untouched, their edges curling in the damp air. Jamal wasn't. A man of words, never had been. Just a forklift operator from East Point who'd worked 12-hour shifts at Orion Tech's warehouse for 7 years to keep food on the table. Now here he was, accused of stealing classified blueprints for some high-tech drone system, a crime that could lock him away for decades. His wife, Keisha, 8 months pregnant with their first child, waited at home, her texts unanswered since. The bailiff confiscated his phone that morning. Across the room, Assistant U.S. Attorney Victor Grayson stood like a king surveying his kingdom, his sharp gray suit tailored to perfection, accentuating his lean frame. At 45, his hair bore streaks of silver that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, giving him an air of seasoned authority. His pale blue eyes scanned the courtroom with a predator's focus, lingering on the jury box where 12 Atlantans, 5 white, 4 black, 2 Latino, and 1 Asian, sat stiffly, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Grayson had built his career on cases like this, turning petty defendants into headline villains with a flick of his tongue. He'd grown up in Buckhead, the son of a real estate mogul, and carried the entitlement of a man who'd never known a hard day's work like Jamal's. To him, this trial was another notch on his belt, a stepping stone to a federal judgeship he'd been eyeing for years. He rustled through a thick stack of papers on the prosecution's table, each sheet stamped with Orion Tech's logo, the evidence he'd wheeled into a noose around Jamal's neck. The judge's gavel cracked against the bench, a sharp sound that cut through the chatter like a blade. Judge Carla Evans, a stern black woman in her late 50s, adjusted her red scarf against her black robes and peered over her glasses at the room. Her reputation for fairness preceded her, but so did her intolerance for nonsense. "Order," she said, her voice low and commanding, the kind that made even the cockiest lawyers sit up straighter. "Mr. Grayson, you may proceed with your opening statement." Grayson rose, buttoning his jacket with a flourish, and strode to the center of the courtroom, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. He turned to the jury, his lips curling into a faint, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his southern drawl polished just enough to sound trustworthy, "today the United States will prove that Jamal Carter, a man entrusted with the security of Orion Tech's warehouse, betrayed that trust in the worst way. He didn't just steal blueprints for a cutting-edge drone system, he stole secrets that could have ended up in enemy hands, all for a quick buck." His words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last, and the jury leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others nodding faintly. Grayson paced, gesturing toward Jamal with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Folks like him," he said, his tone dipping into something darker. "They always want more than they deserve. A good job wasn't enough. A steady paycheck wasn't enough. He had to take what wasn't his, risking our national security for greed. The racism wasn't blatant, not yet, but it simmered beneath his words, a venomous undercurrent that painted Jamal as the stereotype Grayson wanted the jury to see: a black man too lazy to earn his keep, too shifty to be trusted. Jamal's shoulders slumped, his fingers tightening around each other as the weight of those lies pressed down on him. He glanced at his public defender, Sarah Miles, a petite white woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her green eyes flashing with quiet defiance. She scribbled furiously on a yellow legal pad, her pen digging into the paper as if she could carve out a defense from sheer will. Sarah had been assigned to Jamal 3 weeks ago, handed a case file thicker than a phone book and a client who swore he was innocent. She'd met him in a cramped holding cell, his voice soft but steady as he explained how he'd stumbled across a locked server room at Orion Tech, one he wasn't supposed to access. He'd reported it to his supervisor, curious about the extra security, only to find himself fired days later and arrested within a month. Sarah believed him, not just because his story held up, but because she'd seen too many black men like Jamal, chewed up by a system that didn't care to look twice. Her suit was off the rack, her shoes scuffed from running between courtrooms, but her mind was sharp, honed by years of fighting losing battles. She whispered to Jamal now, her voice barely audible over Grayson's theatrics, "We've got this, stay calm." But her own hands trembled slightly, betraying the uphill fight ahead. Grayson kept going, his voice rising as he laid out the prosecution's case. "You'll hear from Orion Tech's security team," he said, pointing to a row of stern-faced white men in suits near the front, their ties crisp and their stares cold. "They'll tell you how Carter used his access card to slip into restricted areas after hours. You'll see server logs, time-stamped and verified, showing his digital fingerprints all over those stolen files. This isn't a maybe, folks. This is a fact." He paused, letting the word hang in the air, then turned to Jamal with a look of pure contempt. "A man like him doesn't belong anywhere near sensitive tech, and he proved it." The jury murmured, a few nodding, their eyes hardening as they sized Jamal up. Sarah clenched her jaw, knowing Grayson's dog whistle racism, subtle enough to dodge an objection, loud enough to stick, was working its magic. In the back of the courtroom, tucked into the last row of benches, sat Tanya Brooks. She was 41, her skin a rich brown that glowed faintly under the dim lights, her frame slim but solid beneath a plain black blazer and matching skirt. Her hair was pulled into a low ponytail, practical and unassuming, and a small silver pin glinted on her lapel, its design too faint to catch a casual eye. To most, she looked like a bored paralegal or maybe a reporter killing time. Her posture straight but relaxed, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, just watched with a stillness that bordered on eerie. Her dark eyes tracked Grayson's every move, catching the way his lips twitched when he sneered at Jamal, the way his shoulders squared when the jury leaned into his words. She'd been there since the trial started that morning, unnoticed by all but Sarah, who'd caught her gaze once and felt an odd spark of recognition she couldn't place. Tanya wasn't here by accident. She'd been tracking Orion Tech for months, her real job hidden behind a cover so tight even her closest friends thought she was a freelance IT consultant. In truth, she was a special agent with the United States Secret Service, part of a covert unit tasked with sniffing out corruption in federal contractors. Orion Tech had pinged her radar after a whistleblower's tip about shady dealings, and Jamal's arrest had lit up her investigation like a flare. She knew Grayson's type, had seen it 100 times, a white man so drunk on power he couldn't imagine being outsmarted, especially not by someone like her. As he wrapped up his statement, strutting back to his table with a swagger that screamed victory, Tanya's lips pressed into a thin line. He'd mocked her in passing, a throwaway jab from the hook, but he had no clue who she was. Not yet. The courtroom settled as Judge Evans nodded to Sarah. "Defense, your opening statement," she said, her tone clipped but expectant. Sarah stood, smoothing her jacket, and stepped forward, her voice softer than Grayson's but steady as steel. "Ladies and gentlemen, she began, meeting each juror's eyes. "Jamal Carter isn't a thief or a traitor. He's a husband, a worker, a man who did his job and got punished for it. The evidence you'll see is shaky at best, twisted at worst. We'll show you a company desperate to hide its own mess, and a prosecution too eager to pin it on someone who doesn't fit their picture of innocence." She glanced at Jamal, offering a faint nod, then sat. The jury shifted, some intrigued, others skeptical. Grayson smirked, leaning back in his chair, already plotting his next move. Tanya watched it all, her mind racing, knowing this was just the beginning of a storm Grayson couldn't see coming. The fluorescent lights in courtroom 12 buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the proceedings as the second day of Jamal Carter's trial dawned humid and tense. The air smelled of stale coffee and polished wood, the kind of scent that clung to every corner of the Atlanta federal courthouse. Jamal sat at the defense table, his borrowed suit jacket now wrinkled from restless sleep, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against the oak surface. Beside him, Sarah Miles adjusted her stack of notes, her green eyes sharp despite the shadows beneath them from a night spent poring over case files. The jury filed in, their faces a mix of fatigue and curiosity, settling into the box like pieces on a chessboard. Judge Carla Evans took her seat, her red scarf a vivid slash against her robes, and rapped her gavel once, the sound crisp and final. "Prosecution, call your first witness," she said, her voice carrying an edge that warned against delays. Victor Grayson rose with the grace of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in his mirror 100 times, his silver-streaked hair catching the light as he buttoned his jacket. "The United States calls Hank Rollins, Orion Tech's chief of security," he announced, his drawl smooth as molasses but laced with steel. Rollins lumbered to the stand, a broad-shouldered white man in his 50s with a buzz cut and a navy suit that strained at the seams. His jowls quivered slightly as he swore in, his meaty hand resting on the Bible like it was a prop in his personal play. Grayson approached, hands clasped behind his back, his pale blue eyes glinting with certainty. "Mr. Rollins," he began, "tell the jury about the night of June 23rd, when the defendant breached Orion Tech's secure servers." Rollins leaned into the microphone, his voice gravelly and deliberate. "I was on duty, monitoring the warehouse feeds. At 11:47 p.m., I saw Carter swipe his access card into Sector C, a restricted zone he had no business being in. Next morning, our IT crew flagged a data breach, blueprints for a classified drone system downloaded from that exact server. His login was all over it." The jury murmured, a few jotting notes, their eyes flicking to Jamal, who shrank under the weight of the accusation. Grayson paced, letting the words sink in. "So, Mr. Rollins, in your expert opinion, could anyone else have done this?" Rollins shook his head, his lips curling into a faint sneer. "No, sir, Carter's card, Carter's login, it's open and shut." Grayson turned to the jury, his smile widening. "A man trusted with keys to the kingdom, and he used them to steal. Thank you, Mr. Rollins." Sarah stood as Grayson sat, her petite frame dwarfed by the courtroom's grandeur, but her resolve unshaken. She smoothed her skirt and approached Rollins, clutching a thin folder. "Mr. Rollins," she said, her tone calm but probing, "Jamal Carter's worked at Orion for 7 years without a single infraction. Doesn't that strike you as odd for a supposed master thief?" Rollins shrugged, his shoulders rolling like boulders. "People snap, greed gets them," Sarah pressed on, flipping open her folder. "And these server logs, you say they're airtight, but isn't it true Orion's IT team controls those records? Couldn't they be altered?" Rollins bristled, his neck reddening. "We run a tight ship, no funny business." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded note she'd found slipped under her files that morning. Tanya Brooks had written it in precise, slanted script. "Check log discrepancies, timestamp overlaps." Sarah's pulse quickened as she glanced at the back row where Tanya sat, her black blazer blending into the shadows, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Rollins," Sarah said, seizing the lifeline, "your logs show Jamal accessing the server at 11:47 p.m., but his time card has him clocked out at 11:30 across the warehouse. How do you explain that?" Rollins blinked, caught off guard, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Maybe he fudged the clock. Sneaky types do that. Sarah pounced. Or maybe someone fudged the logs. The timestamps overlap with another user's session, don't they? The jury stirred, a ripple of doubt passing through them like a breeze through dry leaves. Judge Evans leaned forward, her glasses glinting as she studied Rollins, whose forehead now glistened with sweat. Grayson shot to his feet, his chair scraping the floor. "Objection, Your Honor, speculation. The defense is fishing with no bait." Judge Evans raised a hand, her gaze shifting to Sarah. "Counselor, do you have evidence for this claim?" Sarah nodded, holding up the note, though she didn't dare reveal its source yet. "Preliminary findings, Your Honor. We'll substantiate it." Evans pursed her lips, then said, "Overruled, but tread carefully, Ms. Miles." Sarah exhaled, turning back to Rollins. "So, Mr. Rollins, is it possible those logs aren't as clean as you claim?" Rollins stammered. I'd have to check with IT," his confidence crumbling like wet sand. Sarah returned to her table, her heart pounding with a flicker of triumph. Jamal looked at her, his eyes wide with fragile hope, a whispered, "Thank you," slipping past his lips. The jury's skepticism was palpable, a few jurors exchanging glances, pencils hovering over notebooks. But Grayson wasn't fazed. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his smirk returning as he watched Sarah sit. He'd seen cracks like this before, little dents in his armor he could hammer flat later. As Rollins stepped down, wiping his brow, Grayson's gaze swept the room, landing on Tanya in the gallery. She hadn't moved, her hands still folded, her dark eyes locked on him with an intensity he couldn't quite place. He snorted, loud, enough for the front rows to hear, and muttered to his second chair, "Some random lady thinks she's Perry Mason feeding the defense fairy tales." The comment drew a few chuckles from the prosecution's side, a couple of Orion tech suits nodding in agreement. Grayson stood, adjusting his tie, and addressed Judge Evans. "Your Honor, if I may, the defense's little stunt changes nothing. Logs don't lie, people do." He shot a pointed look at Jamal, then at Sarah, his voice dripping with condescension. "And apparently so do their mystery pen pals." The jury tittered, a few smirking, the doubt Sarah had planted wilting under Grayson's charm. Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her expression stern. "Enough, Mr. Grayson, save it for your rebuttal." But the damage was done. Jamal's brief spark of hope dimmed, his shoulders slumping again as Grayson strutted back to his table, his swagger intact. Tanya, though, didn't flinch. Her fingers tightened slightly around each other, the only sign of the fury brewing beneath. Her calm exterior. She'd expected Grayson to brush off the jab, to lean on his privilege and polish to smooth over the rough edges Sarah had exposed. He was good, she'd give him that. A master at twisting truth into whatever shape suited him. But he'd just painted a target on his own back, mocking her in front of a room that didn't know the storm she could unleash. She'd spent months unraveling Orion Tech's web, and this trial was her entry point. Grayson's racism, his casual dismissal of Jamal as one of those folks, wasn't just personal, it was systemic, the kind she'd sworn to dismantle. As the session broke for recess, she slipped out, her heels silent on the marble, her mind already plotting the next move. Sarah gathered her papers, whispering to Jamal, "We rattled them. That's a start." Jamal nodded, but his eyes were distant, haunted by the weight of Grayson's words still echoing in the room. The jury filed out, their chatter a low hum, some questioning Rollins' stumble, others swayed by Grayson's dismissal. Grayson, meanwhile, leaned over to his team, his voice low but smug. "Let 'em flail. We've got this locked." He didn't see Tanya vanish into the corridor, didn't feel the noose tightening around his own neck. He thought he'd won the round, but he'd only stoked a fire he couldn't control. What do you think? Did Sarah's jab land hard enough? Or is Grayson's arrogance still too strong? Drop a comment number 1 if you think Jamal's got a fighting chance against this rigged game, and hit like and subscribe if you're rooting for justice to claw its way out of this mess. Stick around, because the next twist is coming fast. Could a single note from a stranger really turn the tide, or is something darker waiting to strike back? The night swallowed Atlanta whole, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette against a moonless sky as the clock ticked past 10. Jamal Carter slumped on his sagging couch in their small East Point rental, a two-bedroom shotgun house with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when it rained too hard. The TV flickered with a muted infomercial, casting blue shadows across the living room's worn carpet. Keisha, his wife, slept fitfully in the next room, her swollen belly rising and falling, under a thin blanket, her breaths heavy with the exhaustion of late pregnancy. Jamal's eyes burned from the day's courtroom ordeal. Sarah's small victory against Rollins still buzzing in his mind like a fragile lifeline. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the echo of Grayson's sneering voice, the way the jury's smirks had pierced him deeper than any shout. Maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. A sudden crash shattered the quiet, glass exploding inward as a brick smashed through the front window. Jamal jolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his veins. Another thud followed, then a third, each impact splintering the remaining panes until the night air poured in, thick with the scent of gasoline and menace. He stumbled to his feet, bare soles crunching on shards as he peeked through the jagged hole. Shadows moved outside, 3 figures in hoodies, their faces obscured by darkness. One hefted a spray can, red paint hissing across the weathered siding in jagged letters. Thief. Another laughed, a low guttural sound, and lobbed a Molotov cocktail that missed the porch by inches, flaming out in the patchy grass. Jamal's breath caught, his mind racing. "Keisha!" he yelled, voice cracking as he bolted to the bedroom. She was already awake, eyes wide with terror, clutching the blanket to her chest. "What's happening?" she gasped, her voice trembling. As he yanked her to her feet, "We gotta go now." He dragged her toward the back door, glass biting into his feet, leaving crimson smears on the linoleum. The front of the house erupted in shouts, the vandals kicking at the door, their boots thudding against the flimsy wood. Jamal fumbled with the lock, his hands slick with sweat, and shoved Keisha into the backyard just as the door gave way. He didn't look back, didn't dare, pulling her across the weed-choked lot toward the alley. Sirens wailed in the distance, too slow, too far. They crouched behind a rusted dumpster, Keisha's sobs muffled against his shoulder, her body shaking. As the glow of fire licked the sky behind them, the vandals fled, tires screeching as their pickup peeled out, leaving the house a smoldering wreck. Jamal's chest heaved, his mind a blur of fear and fury. Who'd do this? Why now? Across town, in a sleek high-rise overlooking Peachtree Street, Victor Grayson sipped a bourbon neat, the amber liquid glinting in the dim light of his penthouse office. His phone buzzed on the glass desk, Hank Rollins's name flashing on the screen. He answered with a lazy drawl. "Yeah, Hank, what's up?" Rollins' voice crackled through, smug and clipped. "Took care of that little problem. Carter's place got a makeover tonight. Should rattle him good." Grayson chuckled, swirling the glass, ice clinking softly. "Perfect. He'll be begging for a plea by morning. Keep those boys quiet, though." Rollins grunted assent and the line went dead. Grayson leaned back in his leather chair, a satisfied grin splitting his face. Sarah's courtroom stunt had stung, sure, but this was how you won wars, not with notes and guesses, but with fear. He pictured Jamal cowering, the jury's doubt snuffed out by tomorrow's headlines. Meanwhile, 2 miles from Jamal's burning home, Tanya Brooks crouched in the driver's seat of an unmarked sedan, its black paint blending into the shadows of a derelict lot. Her pulse was steady, her breathing controlled, years of Secret Service training keeping her razor sharp even as chaos unfolded. She'd tailed the vandals from a bar near Orion Tech's warehouse, a dive where Rollins' crew liked to drink cheap beer and brag. Her dashboard glowed with a camera's faint light, its lens trained on the pickup as it roared past, the red paint still wet on their gloves. Click after click, she captured their license plate, their hooded silhouettes, the Molotov's fiery arc. Her jaw tightened, her dark eyes narrowing as she pieced it together. This wasn't random, wasn't some neighborhood grudge. This was Orion Tech flexing muscle, Rollins' handiwork with Grayson's blessing. She slipped the camera into her blazer, its silver pin catching a glint of streetlight, and dialed a burner phone. "Sarah," she whispered when the line picked up, her voice low and urgent. "It's me. Jamal's house got hit tonight. Vandalism. Fire. Thugs tied to Orion. I've got photos, proof, use it. Sarah's sleepy voice sharpened on the other end. What, are you serious? How'd you… Tanya cut her off. No time. File an emergency motion tomorrow. Harassment of a defendant. I'll get you the rest. She hung up before Sarah could press, her mind already shifting to the next step. She'd seen this playbook before, companies burying whistleblowers under threats. But this was personal now. Grayson's mockery in court had lit a fuse, and she'd make sure it burned him down. By dawn, the sun crept over Atlanta's horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple as Jamal and Keisha huddled in a motel off Interstate 85, the room's thin walls trembling with every passing truck. The fire department had doused the blaze, but the house was a ruin. Charred beams and broken glass, all that remained of 7 years' worth of memories. Jamal stared at the cracked ceiling, his arm around Keisha, who clutched a motel towel like a lifeline. Her tears long since dried into numb silence. They're trying to break us, he muttered, his voice hoarse from smoke and despair. Keisha squeezed his hand, her swollen belly pressing against his side. We're still here, she said, fierce despite the quiver in her words. They don't get to win. Back in courtroom 12, the morning session kicked off with a restless buzz, the jury whispering as they settled in, their eyes darting to Jamal's hollow gaze. Sarah strode in, her suit rumpled but her posture defiant, a fresh motion clutched in her hand. Judge Evans raised an eyebrow as Sarah approached the bench, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etching her face. Your Honor, last night, my client's home was attacked, vandalized with racial slurs and firebombs. We believe it's retaliation tied to this case. I'm filing for an investigation. Grayson shot up, his face a mask of feigned shock, though his eyes gleamed with malice. Your Honor, this is outrageous. The defense is grasping at straws, dragging unrelated incidents into court. Judge Evans silenced him with a look, her fingers tapping the gavel. Ms. Miles, you have… Evidence? Sarah nodded, sliding over Tanya's photos, still anonymous, their grainy clarity showing the vandal's truck and the paint cans. Witnesses saw this vehicle near Orion Tech's warehouse earlier. It's no coincidence. The jury gasped, hands flying to mouths, pencils scratching furiously. Grayson's smirk faltered, but he recovered fast, stepping forward with a theatrical sigh. Your Honor, let's be real, Carter's a thief. Only a crook gets targeted like that. This proves my point, not hers. He turned to the jury, his voice smooth as silk. Sounds like his own people turned on him, doesn't it? Guilty men. Make enemies. The room tilted, the jury's faces hardening as Grayson's words sank in, twisting the attack into a noose around Jamal's neck. Sarah's fists clenched, her objection drowned by Grayson's oily confidence. That's speculation. Your Honor, she snapped. But Evans raised a hand, her expression unreadable. I'll take it under advisement, Miss Miles. Proceed with the day's testimony. Sarah sat, her pulse pounding, knowing she'd lost the round. Jamal stared at his hands, the hope from yesterday's crack in Rollins' story snuffed out by Grayson's vicious spin. The vandals had taken his home, but Grayson had taken his chance, painting him as a pariah even to his own community. Tanya slipped into the back row as the session resumed, her blazer crisp despite the sleepless night, her camera tucked away. She'd heard Grayson's play through a courthouse leak, his racist lie turning her evidence against Jamal like a dagger. Her fingers itched to act, to storm the stand and expose him, but she held back, her training a steel cage around her fury. This was bigger than one trial, bigger than Grayson's ego. Orion Tech's claws were deep, and she'd need more than photos to rip them out. As Grayson called his next witness, some Orion Tech flunky, Tanya's eyes locked on him, a predator, sizing up prey. He thought he'd crushed them, but he'd only sharpened her blade. The war was just starting. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse hummed with mid-morning energy, the sun blazing through tall windows, turning courtroom 12 into a sweltering box of tension and sweat. Jamal Carter sat hunched at the defense table, his navy suit jacket now stained, with soot from the night's chaos, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the floor. Beside him, Sarah Miles shuffled papers, her fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion, but her jaw set with determination. The jury shuffled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease after yesterday's bombshell about the vandalism, their notebooks already open. Judge Carla Evans swept onto the bench, her red scarf vivid against her robes, her expression a fortress of impartiality as she rapped her gavel. "Defense, your witness," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a whip. Sarah stood, smoothing her rumpled skirt, and took a deep breath. "The defense calls Tanya Brooks, cybersecurity consultant," she announced, her tone steady despite the stakes. A ripple passed through the gallery as Tanya rose from the back row, her black blazer crisp, her slim frame moving with a quiet grace that belied the fire within. She strode to the stand, her low ponytail swaying, the silver pin on her lapel glinting faintly under the lights. Grayson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips as he sized her up. To him, she was just another nobody, some overeager wannabe Sarah had dredged up to prop her flimsy case. He whispered to his second chair, "Watch." So this flop, loud enough for the front row to hear, drawing a few snickers from Orion Tech's suits. Tanya swore in, her hand steady on the Bible, her dark eyes meeting Judge Evans's with a calm that unnerved the room. Sarah approached, clutching a thick binder of printouts, her voice firm but warm. "Ms. Brooks, please state your qualifications for the record." Tanya's reply was measured, her tone low and clear. "I'm a private consultant specializing in digital forensics and cybersecurity, with 15 years of experience auditing systems for major firms and government contractors." She didn't flaunt degrees or titles, keeping her Secret Service cover tight, but her confidence landed like a punch. Sarah nodded, flipping open the binder. "And you've reviewed the server logs in this case?" Tanya inclined her head. "Yes, extensively." Sarah projected the logs onto a courtroom screen, rows of timestamps and user IDs glowing in stark black and white. "Ms. Brooks, what did you find?" Tanya leaned forward, her braided hair catching the light as she pointed to a highlighted line. "These logs, presented as evidence of Jamal Carter's access, show inconsistencies. The timestamps overlap with another user's session, and the digital signatures, which should be unique, repeat across multiple entries. That's not a glitch, that's manipulation." The jury stirred, a few leaning closer, pencils scratching as they followed her words. Sarah pressed on, handing Tanya a second sheet. "Can you explain this in simpler terms?" Tanya nodded, her voice steady as steel. "Think of it like a fingerprint. Every login leaves one, distinct and traceable. But here, the same print shows up in places it shouldn't. At times, Jamal couldn't have been there. Someone doctored these records to frame him." The room tilted, a hush falling over the gallery as the jury's eyes widened, some glancing at Jamal with newfound doubt. Judge Evans adjusted her glasses, her gaze sharpening on Tanya, her interest piqued. Sarah pushed forward, her voice rising with conviction. "So in your expert opinion, these logs prove Mr. Carter didn't steal the blueprints?" Tanya met her eyes, unflinching. "Yes, they're fabricated. There's no credible evidence he accessed those files." Jamal straightened, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest, his hands unclenching for the first time in days. Sarah beamed, a rare smile breaking through her fatigue as she turned to the jury. No further questions. Grayson shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly, his smirk replaced by a scowl as he stormed to the stand. "Ms. Brooks," he sneered, his drawl thick with contempt. "You expect us to believe you're some genius who spotted what the FBI missed? This lady's a fraud, Your Honor." He flung his arms wide, turning to the jury with theatrical disbelief. "She's got no badge, no credentials we can verify, just a binder of nonsense." Tanya didn't blink, her posture rigid, her voice cool as ice. "My findings stand on their own, Mr. Grayson. The data doesn't lie, even if you don't like what it says." The jury tittered, a few smirking at Grayson's flailing, his mockery backfiring as Tanya's calm shredded his bluster. Judge Evans leaned in, her tone sharp. "Mr. Grayson, do you have a question or just a tantrum?" Grayson's face reddened, sweat beading on his brow as he pivoted. "Fine. How do we know you didn't cook these logs yourself, huh? Some consultant with an agenda?" Tanya's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. "I don't work for Orion Tech, Mr. Grayson. I don't have a motive to fake evidence. Can they say the same? The gallery gasped, the jury's pencils flying, and Grayson stammered, "Objection, speculation." But Evans overruled him with a flick of her wrist, her eyes locked on Tanya. "Answer stands. Move on." Grayson retreated, his swagger deflated, his pale blue eyes darting as he sat, sweat staining his collar. Sarah squeezed Jamal's arm, whispering, "We've got him on the ropes." Jamal nodded, his chest swelling with a fragile belief that justice might actually tip his way. The jury murmured, their skepticism shifting toward Orion Tech, their faces softening as they glanced at him. Even Judge Evans seemed swayed, her pen tapping thoughtfully against her notes. For a moment, the courtroom felt like it belonged to them, Grayson's arrogance a cracked shell under Tanya's quiet power. But outside, in a glass-walled office atop Orion Tech's headquarters, Hank Rollins paced, his buzz cut glistening with sweat as he barked into a phone. "She's tearing us apart in there, Preston. Carter's crew thinks they've won." On the other end, Preston Wells, Orion's CEO, lounged in a leather chair, his silver hair slicked back, his tailored suit hugging a frame fattened by decades of excess. At 63, he was a titan of Atlanta's defense industry, a white man who'd built an empire on government contracts and ruthless ambition. His voice rasped through the line, cold and deliberate. "They've won nothing. That black chick's a problem, but we'll fix it." "Carter's done." Rollins hesitated, his jowls quivering. "What's the play?" Wells chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding. "Hit him where it hurts. Hard. I'll handle the rest." Wells hung up, his thick fingers dialing another number, this one to a crooked cop he kept on speed dial. "Get your boys ready," he said, his tone casual but lethal. "Carter's wife works at Grady Memorial. Make sure she doesn't tomorrow. And plant something at his place, something big. We end this now." He leaned back sipping a scotch, his pale eyes glinting with the certainty of a man who'd never lost a fight. Tanya's testimony was a thorn, sure, but he'd rip it out and bury them all. Grayson might be sweating, but Wells didn't care about pawns. This was about power, about keeping nosy black folks like Jamal and Tanya in their place. Back in the courtroom, Tanya stepped down, her heels clicking softly as she returned to the gallery, her face a mask of composure hiding the storm within. She'd felt the shift, the jury's trust, Jamal's hope, Sarah's relief. But she knew Orion Tech too well, knew men like Wells didn't flinch at a single blow. Grayson slumped at his table, his fingers drumming a nervous beat, his mind racing to salvage his case. He'd mocked Tanya, called her a fraud, and now the room buzzed with whispers of his misstep. Jamal dared to believe, his lips curving into a faint smile as Sarah packed her notes. But Tanya's gut churned, her instinct screaming that the real fight was about to begin. Wells wouldn't let this stand, and she'd be ready when he struck back. "What do you make of Tanya's takedown? Think she's got Grayson cornered for good, or is his smugness just biding its time?" Drop a comment number 1 if you're cheering for Jamal to finally catch a break against these racist sharks. And smash that like and subscribe if you're hooked on seeing justice claw its way through this mess. The tide's turning, but how long can it last? Could Wells's next move shatter everything Tanya's built, or is she one step ahead of his game? The afternoon sun blazed over Atlanta, turning the asphalt into a shimmering haze as Jamal Carter sat in the motel room off Interstate 85, the air conditioner rattling like a dying engine. The room smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant, a far cry from the home he'd lost the night before, its charred remains still smoking in his mind. He leaned against the headboard, his sooty suit jacket draped over a chair, his bare feet pressed into the thin carpet. Keisha sat beside him, her swollen belly straining against her faded t-shirt, her hands twisting a damp towel as she stared at the muted TV. Tanya's testimony replayed in Jamal's head, her calm voice slicing through Grayson's bluster, the jury's nods giving him a sliver of hope he hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe they'd pull through this nightmare after all. A sharp knock jolted him upright, his heart lurching as Keisha flinched, her eyes darting to the door. "Who's that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Jamal stood, peering through the peephole, his stomach dropping at the sight of 2 uniformed cops, their badges glinting in the harsh light. He cracked the door, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Can I help you?" The taller cop, a white man with a buzz cut and a sneer, shoved a paper through the gap. "Search warrant. Step aside, Carter." Before Jamal could protest, they barged in, boots thudding on the floor, their hands on holsters as if he'd bolt. Keisha scrambled to her feet, clutching her belly. "What's going on?" she demanded, but the second cop, a stocky guy with a sunburned neck, ignored her, ripping open drawers and tossing clothes onto the bed. Jamal's pulse raced, his mind scrambling for answers as the tall cop yanked a duffel bag from under the bed, unzipping it with a triumphant grunt. "Well, well," he said, pulling out a USB drive, its silver casing catching the light. "What's this?" Jamal stared, his breath catching. "That ain't mine," he shouted, stepping forward, but the cop shoved him back, hard enough to slam him against the wall. Keisha cried out, "Stop it!" as the stocky cop smirked, holding up the drive like a trophy. "Looks like classified files to me. Guess you're dumber than we thought, keeping it here." Jamal's knees buckled, his voice hoarse. "I didn't. Put that there, you planted it." The tall cop laughed, cuffing Jamal's wrists with a brutal twist. "Tell it to the judge, thief." Keisha lunged forward, tears streaming down her face, but the stocky cop blocked her, his bulk a wall between her and Jamal. "Stay back, ma'am, unless you want in on this." They dragged Jamal out, his bare feet scraping the pavement, the EE Motel's neon sign buzzing overhead as neighbors peeked from cracked blinds. Keisha's sobs echoed behind him, her pleas swallowed by the screech of the patrol car's tires as they sped off. At Grady Memorial Hospital, just as the raid unfolded, Keisha's phone buzzed with a call from her supervisor. "You're fired," the voice snapped, clipped and cold. "Security risk per management, don't come in." Keisha dropped the phone, her hands shaking, the weight of Wells' orders crushing her world in tandem with Jamal's arrest, across Quay. Town in courtroom 12, the afternoon session kicked off with a restless hum, the jury settling in as Victor Grayson strutted to his table, his grey suit pristine despite the heat. He'd gotten the call from Rollins an hour ago, a smug "we've got him" that lit his eyes with glee. Sarah Miles rushed in, her hair escaping its bun, her face pale as she clutched a fresh report from the motel raid. Judge Carla Evans took her seat, her red scarf a stark contrast to her furrowed brow, sensing the shift in the air. "Prosecution, your next witness," she said, her tone clipped. Grayson stood, his smirk wide enough to split his face. "Your Honor, we've got new evidence that changes everything." He held up the USB drive, sealed in an evidence bag, its silver gleam a dagger in Sarah's chest. "Found this morning at the defendant's motel, packed with the same blueprints he claims he didn't steal. Guess his consultant missed this little gem." He turned to the jury, his drawl dripping with triumph. "This isn't just theft, it's arrogance, hiding it right under our noses." The jury gasped, hands flying to mouths, their softening. Looks from Tanya's testimony hardening into disgust. Sarah shot up, her voice cracking. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a setup. My client's home was attacked last night and now this. It's too convenient." Grayson laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Convenient? It's damning. He's a crook, plain and simple." Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her eyes narrowing. "Ms. Miles, you have proof of tampering," Sarah faltered, her hands empty of Tanya's next move. "Not yet, Your Honor, but I request a recess to investigate." Evans sighed, her patience thinning. "Denied for now. Proceed, Mr. Grayson." Sarah sank into her chair, her pulse pounding, knowing she'd been outflanked. Jamal, brought in cuffs from holding, stared at the drive, his hope collapsing like a house of cards. The jury's eyes bored into him, cold and unforgiving. Grayson's racist spin, only a guilty man keeps souvenirs, sealing their judgment. Tanya slipped into the gallery as Grayson strutted back, her black blazer creased from a night of tailing leads, her camera stowed in a hidden pocket. She'd missed the raid by minutes, stuck in traffic after dropping evidence with Sarah, and now her stomach twisted as she saw Jamal in chains, Keisha's absence screaming trouble. Her poised facade cracked, a flicker of rage breaking through as she watched Grayson gloat, his mockery of her testimony a taunt she couldn't counter yet. She'd handed Sarah a win, only for Wells to smash it with a planted drive and a fired wife, a double blow dripping with racial venom. Her fingers dug into her palms, nails biting skin as she pieced it together. Crooked cops, Orion's payroll, Grayson's glee. This was no accident. It was war. In Orion Tech's glass tower, Preston Wells leaned back in his chair, a scotch in hand, the city sprawling below him like a conquered kingdom. Rollins stood across the desk, his buzz cut damp with nervous sweat, his jowls quivering as he reported the raid's success. "Cops got the drive in. Carter's locked up tight. Wife's out of a job too," he said, his voice gruff with pride. Wells nodded, his silver hair glinting as he sipped, his pale eyes cold as ice. Good. That black boy thought he could squirm out, and that woman Brooks thought she'd play hero. They're done. Rollins shifted, uneasy. "She's sharp." "Preston, what if she digs deeper?" Wells's lips curled, a predator's grin. "Let her dig. She'll hit a wall of badges and bullets. We own this game." Wells set the glass down, his thick fingers tapping the desk, his mind already spinning the next move. Firing Keisha was a warning, the drive a kill shot, but he wasn't finished. Tanya's testimony had stung, her calm slicing through his empire's armor, and he'd crush her for it. He'd built Orion on contracts and control, and no black upstart or nosy consultant would unravel it. Racism wasn't just his tool, it was his creed, a belief that folks like Jamal belonged beneath his boot. He dialed his cop contact again, voice low. "Keep an eye on Brooks. She's next." Back in the courtroom, Sarah whispered to Jamal, her voice shaking, "We'll fight this. I'll get Tanya's help." Jamal nodded, but his eyes were hollow, the weight of cuffs and Keisha's loss burying him alive. The jury filed out for recess, their chatter a low growl of condemnation. Grayson's spin turning Tanya's triumph into dust. Tanya lingered in the gallery, her mind racing, her resolve hardening like steel. She'd underestimated Wells' reach, his willingness to burn everything to keep power. Her cover held, but her mission teetered and Jamal paid the price. She slipped out, her heels silent on the marble, knowing the hammer had fallen, but the real storm was still brewing. Grayson smirked at his table, savoring the taste of victory, oblivious to the noose tightening around his own neck. The night draped Atlanta in a humid shroud, streetlights flickering like dying stars as Tanya Brooks hunched over a laptop in a dingy safe house off Auburn Avenue. The room was a concrete box, its walls stained with decades of neglect, the air thick with the tang of rust and stale cigarettes. A single bulb swayed overhead, casting jagged shadows across her face, her dark eyes burning with a fury she'd kept caged too long. Her black blazer hung on a chair, sleeves rolled up, the silver pin glinting on its lapel as she typed furiously, her fingers a blur over the keys. The motel raid, Keisha's firing, Grayson's smug parade of that planted USB, it all gnawed at her. A racist machine grinding Jamal into dust. She'd underestimated Wells's ruthlessness, but no more. Tonight she'd hit back. Her screen glowed with Orion Tech's server data, a digital fortress she'd breached hours ago using backdoors she'd mapped during months of covert surveillance. Lines of code scrolled past, financial records unspooling. Like a confession. Payments to shell companies, millions funneled into illegal arms deals, encrypted emails tying Wells to a network of dirty deals. Then a gold mine, a ledger showing cash wired to Grayson's campaign fund labeled consulting fees, but reeking of bribery. Tanya's lips pressed into a thin line, her pulse quickening as she copied it all to an encrypted drive. Her secret, service training guiding every move. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about dismantling a corrupt empire built on racial hate. She emailed a chunk to Sarah, a burner account pinging with the subject, "Wells' Dirty Laundry. File. Here now." In the federal courthouse, dawn broke over courtroom 12. The sky a bruised purple as Sarah Miles stormed in, her hair a wild mess, her green eyes blazing with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She clutched a fresh motion, the pages still warm. From the printer, Tanya's evidence burning a hole in her bag. Jamal sat in cuffs, his face gaunt, his bare feet scuffing the floor after a night in lockup. The jury filed in, their expressions a wall of suspicion, Grayson's USB stunt still fresh in their minds. Judge Carla Evans took her seat, her red scarf a beacon of authority. her gavel rapping once. "Counsel, any motions before we proceed?" she asked, her tone wary. Sarah shot up, her voice trembling with urgency. "Yes, Your Honor. Emergency motion to introduce new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and corporate corruption." Grayson leapt to his feet, his grey suit wrinkled from a restless night, his silver hair askew. "This is absurd, Your Honor." "Another desperate stunt." But his pale blue eyes flickered with unease, his smirk faltering as Sarah slapped the motion on the bench. Judge Evans skimmed it, her glasses slipping down her nose, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. "Ms. Miles," she said, her voice low, "you're alleging Orion Tech and Mr. Grayson are tied to illegal transactions?" Sarah nodded, thrusting Tanya's printouts forward. "Bank records, Your Honor, payments from Orion to Grayson's, campaign coinciding with this case, and financials showing arms deals Orion's desperate to hide. Jamal's a scapegoat." The gallery erupted, gasps and whispers ricocheting off the walls as the jury's eyes widened, pencils flying across. "Notebooks." Judge Evans rapped her gavel, silencing the chaos, her gaze piercing Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, your response?" He strutted forward, his drawl thick with scorn, though sweat beaded on his brow. "This is delusional, Your Honor. Some mystery. Source cooks up fairy tales and we're supposed to buy it. She's grasping." He jabbed a finger at Tanya in the back row, her blazer crisp despite the night's grind, her dark eyes locked on him. "That woman's feeding her lies again, thinking she's a detective." The jury tittered, but their smirks faded as Evans held up a hand, her voice steel. "Enough. I'm ordering Orion's financials subpoenaed. If this holds water, Mr. Grayson, you've got bigger problems than a trial." Grayson froze, his face paling as the room tilted, the jury's doubt shifting from Jamal to him. Sarah sat, her chest heaving, a flicker of triumph in her eyes as she whispered to Jamal, "We're back in it." Jamal nodded, his cuffs clinking, a fragile hope blooming in his chest. He glanced at Tanya, her stillness a rock in the storm, and dared to believe again, the weight of the USB lifting slightly. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously, the air crackling with the scent of Grayson's panic. He slumped into his chair, his fingers drumming a frantic beat, his mind racing to salvage his crumbling case. He'd mocked Tanya again, called her delusional, but now the room saw his sweat, his cracks, and he hated her for it. In Orion Tech's tower, Preston Wells slammed his fist on his desk, the Scotch glass toppling, amber liquid pooling across polished wood. Rollins stood before him, his buzz cut damp, his jowls quivering as he relayed the courtroom blow. "She's got our books, Preston. Grayson's flailing," he said, his voice tight with fear. Wells' silver hair gleamed as he stood, his pale eyes narrowing to slits, his tailored suit creasing with his rage. "That black bitch thinks she can touch me?" he snarled, his racism raw and unfiltered now, a venom that fueled his empire. "She's dead. Carter's dead. End it tonight." Rollins blinked, his neck reddening. "A hit? That's risky." Wells cut him off, his voice a low growl. "Risky is letting her breathe. Call your boys, make it messy." Wells paced, his thick fingers flexing, his mind a furnace of hate and strategy. Tanya's gambit had pierced his armor, exposing cracks he'd buried under millions in muscle. He'd built Orion on deals with warlords and generals, deals that thrived in shadows, and Jamal's nosy questions had threatened to light them up. Framing him was clean, but Tanya's digging was a grenade, and Grayson's bribe was a loose thread she'd yanked hard. He dialed his cop contact, voice icy. "Brooks leaves that motel tonight. Make sure she doesn't see Dawn." He hung up, sipping a fresh scotch, his grin returning, a predator certain of the kill. Jamal's hope, Tanya's fight, it had all. Burn by morning. Back in the courthouse, the session broke, the jury filing out with hushed chatter, their eyes darting between Grayson and Jamal, their pencils still from the shock. Sarah gathered her notes, whispering to Jamal, "Tanya's evidence is gold. We've got a real shot now." Jamal nodded, his lips twitching into a faint smile, the first in days, his mind clinging to the image of Keisha safe, their baby still a promise. Tanya lingered in the gallery, her blazer hiding the exhaustion in her bones, her dark eyes tracking Grayson as he stormed out, his swagger a ghost. She'd rattled him, cracked Wells' facade, but her gut screamed danger. She'd seen Wells's type men who'd rather kill than lose, and her move had painted a target on her back. She slipped into the corridor, her heels silent on the marble, her mind racing with contingencies. The financials would bury Grayson, maybe Orion, but Wells wouldn't wait for subpoenas. Her burner buzzed, Sarah's voice crackling through. "Tanya, this is huge. You okay?" Tanya's reply was clipped. "I'm fine. Keep Jamal safe. It's not over." She hung up, her resolve hardening like a blade. She'd struck a blow, but the war was peaking, and Wells' next hit would be bloodier than logs or jobs. Grayson's mockery echoed in her ears, a taunt she'd turn into his epitaph, but first, she had to survive the night. Think Tanya's got Wells on the run, or is his empire too deep to crack? Should Jamal dare hope again, or is this just a tease before the fall? Drop a comment number 1 if you're raging at Grayson's dirty cash and Wells' racist clause, and hit like and subscribe if you're locked in for this fight against corruption's ugly face. The stakes are climbing, but what's lurking in the shadows? Will Wells's hit land before Tanya can strike again, or is her next play already in motion? Dusk bled into night over Atlanta, the city's pulse thumping through the neon-lit sprawl as Tanya Brooks pulled into the gravel lot of a rundown motel off Moreland Avenue. The air hung heavy with exhaust and humidity, the kind that stuck to your skin like a bad memory. Her unmarked sedan crunched to a stop, its black paint scratched from months of tailing leads, the engine ticking as it cooled. She ditched the safe house after Wells's financials hit the courtroom, knowing Orion's claws would reach for her next. Her black blazer lay folded on the passenger seat, the silver pin tucked into a pocket, her cover still a shield as she stepped out, a duffel slung over her shoulder. The motel's flickering sign buzzed overhead, casting her shadow long and jagged across the cracked pavement. She scanned the lot, her Secret Service instincts humming, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Inside room 17, she dropped, the duffel on a sagging bed, the springs groaning under its weight, and flipped on a lamp that bathed the space in a sickly yellow glow. The walls were stained with watermarks, the carpet threadbare, but it was a hole to hide in, not a home. She pulled her laptop from the bag, booting it up to cross-check the financials she'd leaked, her mind racing to stay ahead of Wells. Next move. The courtroom wind had stung him, Grayson's sweat a crack in their armor, but men like Wells didn't bleed quietly. Her burner buzzed, Sarah's voice crackling through. "Tanya, the judge is digging into Orion. You safe?" Tanya's reply was curt. "For now, watch Jamal." She hung up, her dark eyes narrowing as a car's headlights swept past the window, too slow, too deliberate. The first bullet shattered the windshield of her sedan outside, glass exploding. Into a glittering rain that caught the motel's neon flicker. Tanya dropped flat, her body hitting the floor as the second shot punched through the window, splintering the frame above her head. Adrenaline surged, her training kicking in like a second heartbeat as she rolled behind the bed, her hand yanking a Glock from the duffel. Two masked gunmen burst through the door, boots crunching glass, their silenced pistols spitting fire. The taller one, a wiry figure in black, sprayed rounds into the mattress, feathers bursting like snow, while the shorter one, stocky and bald, swept the room, his breath rasping through a ski mask. "Where's the bitch?" he growled, his voice muffled but dripping with hate. Tanya moved like a ghost, her body low and fluid as she fired twice, the Glock's bark sharp in the confined space. The tall gunman staggered, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest, his gun clattering as he crumpled. The stocky one spun, his pistol flashing, but Tanya was faster, diving behind the dresser as bullets chewed the wood. Splinters stung her cheek, blood trickling warm down her jaw, but she didn't flinch. She popped up, squeezing off 3 rounds, 2 catching him in the shoulder, the third grazing his skull. He howled, crashing into the wall, his mask slipping to reveal a scarred, snarling face before he bolted, blood trailing behind him. Tanya didn't chase, her breath ragged as she grabbed her duffel and laptop, kicking the dead gunman's gun. Aside. She sprinted into the night, her heels pounding the gravel, the wounded man's taillights vanishing around a bend. Sirens wailed in the distance, too late to matter, as she slipped into an alley, her sedan a bullet-riddled wreck. Atlanta's back streets swallowed her. The maze of brick and shadows her only shield as she vanished, bloodied but alive. Her fury a live wire. Wells had sent killers, not warnings, and she'd survived by a hair. Her cover held, but her mission teetered, and she vowed to make him pay. The next morning, Courtroom 12 buzzed with a frenetic edge, the air thick with whispers, as Victor. Grayson strode in, his grey suit pressed, his silver hair slicked back, a predator scenting blood. He'd gotten the call from Rollins at dawn. Tanya hit, one man down, the other limping away. His smirk was back wider than ever as he clutched a fresh report, its ink still wet from Orion's spin machine. Sarah Miles sat at the defense table, her face pale, her green eyes darting as Jamal shuffled in, cuffs clinking, his gaunt frame slumping under the weight of the USB frame-up. Judge Carla Evans took her seat, her red scarf a stark slash, her gavel rapping once. Order. Prosecution. Your witness. Grayson stood, his drawl oozing triumph. Your Honor, we've got an update that buries this case. Tanya Brooks, the defense's so-called consultant, was involved in a shootout last night. One dead, one wounded, and she's gone, a fugitive. He waved the report, turning to the jury with a theatrical flourish. She's no witness, she's a killer. This proves everything I've said. Her evidence is a sham, and Carter's her pawn. The jury gasped, hands flying to mouths, their eyes widening as they stared at Jamal. His hope from yesterday's financials snuffed out. Sarah shot up, her voice shaking. Objection, Your Honor. This is unverified, irrelevant. Where's the proof she's guilty? Grayson laughed, a sharp grating sound cutting her off. Proof? She fled a crime scene, Ms. Miles. Innocent people don't run. He turned to Judge Evans, his smirk smug. I move to strike her testimony. She's a fraud and Carter's defense collapses without her. The gallery erupted, reporters scribbling, the jury's faces hardening into a wall of disgust. Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her expression grim. Ms. Miles, you have evidence she's still credible? Sarah faltered, her hands empty, Tanya's absence a void she couldn't fill. Not yet, Your Honor, but I request time to investigate. Evans sighed, her patience fraying. Denied. I'll rule on the motion later. Proceed. Sarah sank into her chair, her pulse pounding, knowing Grayson had turned Tanya's survival into a dagger. Jamal stared at his cuffs, his chest hollow, his whisper barely audible. She's gone? After all that? Sarah gripped his arm, her voice fierce despite the despair. She's not gone, she's fighting, we'll find her. But the jury's eyes bored into him, cold and condemning, Grayson's racist spin. She's a thug just like him, twisting the ambush into proof of guilt. Grayson strutted back, his swagger restored, his mind savoring the taste of victory. He'd mocked Tanya again, and now she was a ghost, his case airtight once more. In Orion Tech's tower, Preston Wells leaned against his desk, a scotch in hand, the city's morning sprawl glinting below. Rollins stood before him, his buzz cut damp with sweat, his jowls quivering as he relayed the hit's fallout. One guy's dead, the other's in hiding. Brooks got away, he said, his voice tight with unease. Wells's silver hair caught, the light as he sipped, his pale eyes glinting with a mix of fury and glee. She's tougher than I thought, he rasped, his racism a raw edge now. But she's done. Grayson's got the jury eating out of his hand, and Carter's finished. Rollins shifted, his neck reddening. What if she talks? Wells' grin widened, a predator's bared teeth. She's a dead woman walking. No one will believe her now. Wells set the glass down, his thick fingers flexing, his mind already plotting the next kill. Tanya's escape was a thorn, her resilience a slap to his control. But Grayson's spin had bought him time. He'd built Orion on shadows and blood, and no black operative would unravel it, not after he'd crushed Jamal's life to ash. He dialed his cop contact, voice low. Find her. Finish it. He hung up, his certainty unshaken, his hate a furnace stoked by every move she'd made. She'd survived, but he'd bury her yet. Tanya crouched in an abandoned warehouse miles away, her blazer torn, blood crusting on her cheek as she patched a graze on her arm with a stolen first aid kit. Her Glock lay beside her, the laptop humming as she uploaded the ambush photos, her breath steady despite the pain. She'd killed to live, her training a lifeline, but Wells' reach was deeper than she'd feared. Jamal's despair, Sarah's struggle. They weighed on her, but she pushed it down, her resolve a steel core. Her cover held, her mission burned, and she'd fight through hell to end this. She whispered to the dark, "You'll pay, Wells." Her voice a vow as she vanished. Deeper into Atlanta's underbelly, a hunted warrior ready for war. The Atlanta night pulsed with a restless energy, the air thick with the scent of asphalt and distant rain, as Tanya Brooks slipped through the shadows of Orion Tech's warehouse district. Her torn blazer was swapped for a dark hoodie, the silver. Pin stashed in a pocket, her Glock holstered beneath the fabric. Blood still crusted her cheek from the motel ambush, a dull ache throbbing in her arm, but her dark eyes burned with a fury that drowned out the pain. She'd survived Wells' hit, her Secret Service reflexes a lifeline, but Grayson's courtroom twist had turned her into a fugitive, a killer in the jury's eyes. She couldn't stop now, not with Jamal's life hanging by a thread. Her target loomed ahead, Orion's headquarters, a squat fortress of glass and steel glowing faintly under floodlights. She'd get the proof to bury them, or die trying. Inside courtroom 12, the morning session crackled with tension, the humidity seeping through the walls as Victor Grayson stood at his table, his gray suit pristine, his silver hair slicked back with a victor's sheen. He held a flash drive, its black casing a new weapon in his arsenal, and his pale blue eyes glinted with malice as he faced the jury. Sarah Miles sat beside Jamal, her green eyes bloodshot, her hands clutching a legal pad as if it could shield them from the storm. Jamal's cuffs clinked, his gaunt face etched with despair, the motel raid and Tanya's absence crushing his fragile hope. Judge Carla Evans rapped her gavel, her red scarf a stark slash against her robes, her voice sharp. "Prosecution, proceed." Grayson strutted forward, his drawl thick with triumph as he waved the drive. "Your Honor, we've got a recording that seals this case tight." Jamal Carter confessing to a co-worker caught on tape. He plugged it into a laptop, the speakers crackling as a distorted voice, eerily like Jamal's, rasped, "Yeah, I took the blueprints. Easy money." The jury gasped, hands flying to mouths, their eyes widening in horror as they stared at Jamal, his breath hitching in his throat. Sarah leapt up, her voice breaking. "Objection, Your Honor. This is fabricated. We've had no time to verify it." Grayson laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Verify? It's his voice, Ms. Miles. These people always lie, and now we've got proof." The gallery erupted, whispers ricocheting as the jury's faces hardened. Grayson's racist rant. He's a born thief just like his kind and sinking hooks into their doubts. Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her expression grim. "Ms. Miles, you have evidence this is fake." Sarah faltered, her hands empty, Tanya's absence a gaping wound. "Not yet, Your Honor, but I request a forensic analysis." Evans sighed, her patience fraying. "Denied for now, the jury will hear it." Jamal slumped, his whisper barely audible. "That ain't me. They're killing me." Sarah gripped his arm, her voice fierce. "We'll fight this. Tanya's out there." But the jury's eyes were cold, Grayson's spin turning her absence into guilt. Across town, Tanya scaled a fire escape on Orion's rear wall, her hoodie blending into the night, her breath steady as she pried open a vent. She'd cased this place for months, knew its weak spots like a map in her mind. The vent creaked, metal groaning as she slid inside, dropping into a maintenance hall thick with the hum of servers. Her sneakers padded silently, her Glock drawn as she navigated to the security hub, a glassed-in room pulsing with monitors. She hacked the lock with a stolen keycard, slipping inside, her laptop booting up as she jacked into the mainframe. Her fingers flew, pulling unedited footage from the warehouse cams, the real audio of Jamal's co-worker chat, a mundane, "How's the shift?" with no confession. She grinned, a rare flash of teeth as she burned it to a drive, her proof to shred. Grayson's lie. The download ticked to 90% when boots thudded outside, a guard's shadow looming through the glass. Tanya ducked, her pulse spiking as he rattled the door, his radio crackling. "Perimeter check, all clear." He moved off, oblivious, and she exhaled, pocketing the drive as the screen hit 100. She slipped out, retracing her steps, the footage a lifeline for Jamal. She reached Sarah via burner, her voice a whisper in the dark. Got the real tape. Grayson's toast. Meet me at the courthouse back lot, noon. Sarah's relief crackled through. You're a miracle, Tanya. She hung up, her resolve steel as she scaled back out, the night swallowing her once more. In court, Sarah played the waiting game, her nerves fraying as Grayson gloated, his swagger restored. The jury broke for lunch, their chatter a low growl of condemnation, the fake confession echoing in their heads. Sarah slipped out, racing to the lot, her heart pounding as Tanya emerged from the shadows, hoodie low, the drive in hand. Unedited audio, Tanya said, her voice hoarse but firm. Jamal's clean. Sarah clutched it, tears pricking her eyes as she rushed back, filing. An emergency motion. The session resumed, Judge Evans eyeing the drive as Sarah stood. Your Honor, new evidence proving the prosecution's tape is a forgery. The courtroom hushed, Grayson's smirk faltering as Sarah played Tanya's footage, the co-workers' bland chat filling the silence, no hint of theft. The jury blinked, pencils hovering, their doubt shifting as Grayson leapt up, his face reddening. Objection, chain of custody, where'd this come from? Sarah shot back. A source risking everything for truth. Judge Evans leaned in, her glasses glinting. Overruled. This stays. Explain yourself, Mr. Grayson. He stammered, sweat beading on his brow, his mockery of Tanya a ghost haunting him now. Jamal straightened, his cuffs clinking, a spark of hope flickering as the jury's eyes softened, Grayson's lie unraveling. But in Orion's tower, Preston Wells watched a live feed from a hidden cam, his silver hair glinting as he snarled, his scotch glass shattering against the wall. Rollins flinched, his buzz cut damp, his jowls quivering as Wells roared, "She's in my house stealing my shit." His pale eyes burned, his racism a raw wound as he dialed his cop contact, voice lethal. "Brooks killed your boy last night. Frame her. Ballistics witnesses now." He hung up, his thick fingers flexing, his grin returning, a predator tasting blood. Tanya's footage was a gut punch, but he'd bury her as a cop killer, a black thug no jury would trust. Minutes later, sirens screamed outside the courthouse, cops swarming the lot as Tanya lingered, her hoodie low, waiting to slip away. They grabbed her, cuffs snapping tight, her Glock confiscated as they dragged her inside, mid-trial, her bloodied face a spectacle. Grayson crowed, his voice booming, "There she is, Your Honor. A murderer. She killed a man last night, not a consultant." The jury gasped, hands flying to mouths, their softening looks hardening into horror as cops paraded her before them, her hoodie torn, her dark eyes defiant. Sarah leapt up, her voice breaking. "This is a setup, Your Honor. She's being targeted." Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her expression grim. "Order, Ms. Miles, explain." Sarah faltered, her hands shaking. Tanya's arrest a blow she couldn't counter. "She's a witness, not a killer," Grayson laughed, his drawl vicious. "A witness, she's a thug, just like Carter. Her evidence is trash now." The gallery erupted, reporters scribbling, the jury's eyes cold as ice, Wells frame up, twisting Tanya's triumph into a noose. Jamal slumped, his hope snuffed out, whispering, "She's gone again." Tanya stood tall, her voice cutting through, "I'm not done." But the cuffs held, Wells' hate winning the round. Think Tanya's. Footage should have saved the day. Or was Wells's frame-up too slick to beat? Is Grayson's racism finally cracking, or does he still hold the reins? Drop a comment number 1 if you're furious at this rigged system screwing Jamal and Tanya at every turn, and smash like and subscribe if you're gripped by this battle for truth against corruption's claws. The tide's flipped, but how deep does it go? Can Tanya claw out of this trap, or has Wells just locked her fate? The Atlanta Federal Courthouse trembled with mid-afternoon heat, the air in courtroom 12 thick with sweat and disbelief, as Tanya Brooks stood in handcuffs before the jury, her hoodie torn, blood crusted on her cheek from the motel ambush. Her dark eyes blazed defiance, but the cuffs bit into her wrists, a stark contrast to the poised consultant who'd rattled Grayson days ago. Jamal Carter slumped at the defense table, his gaunt face ashen, his borrowed suit jacket hanging loose, as the weight of her arrest crushed his flickering hope. Sarah Miles leapt to her feet, her green eyes wild, her voice cracking as she faced Judge Carla Evans. "Your Honor, this is a travesty. Ms. Brooks is a witness, not a criminal." The jury stared, their pencils frozen, their faces a mix of shock and revulsion as Grayson's frame-up took root. Victor Grayson strode forward, his grey suit pristine, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his smirk a blade twisting deeper. "Your Honor," he boomed, his drawl thick with triumph, "Tanya Brooks is no hero, she's a killer. She gunned down a man last night, fled the scene, and now she's caught red-handed." He waved a police report, its ink still fresh from Wells' crooked cops, ballistics tying her Glock to the dead gunman. Her testimony's a lie, her evidence tainted, and Carter's defense collapses with her. The gallery erupted, gasps and murmurs ricocheting as reporters scribbled furiously, the jury's eyes hardening into a wall of condemnation. Sarah's fists clenched, her objection drowning in Grayson's glee. "This is a setup, Your Honor. They're silencing her." Judge Evans wrapped her gavel, her red scarf a vivid slash against her robes, her expression a storm of doubt and fury. "Order! Ms. Miles, you have proof of this alleged setup?" Sarah faltered, her hands empty. Tanya's arrest a blow she couldn't parry. "Not yet, Your Honor, but I request an immediate recess to investigate." Grayson laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Investigate what? She's a cop killer. The defense has nothing left." Evans raised a hand, her voice steel. "Enough, Mr. Grayson. I'll hear arguments in chambers. Court's recessed for 30 minutes." The jury filed out, their chatter a low growl of disgust, their faith in Tanya and Jamal shattered by Grayson's racist spin. Tanya stood tall as cops flanked her, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm not done, Sarah. Check Wells is safe." She mouthed the last words, her lips barely moving, a hidden signal as they dragged her to holding, her sneakers scuffing the marble. Sarah caught it, her pulse spiking, a lifeline in the storm. She grabbed her bag, whispering to Jamal, "Hang on, she's still fighting." Jamal nodded, his cuffs clinking but his eyes were hollow, his whisper barely audible. "They've got us both now." Grayson strutted out, his swagger restored, his mind savoring the taste of victory. He'd turned Tanya's survival into a noose, and he'd hang Jamal with it. Sarah didn't waste the recess, racing to her office 3 blocks away, her heels pounding the pavement, her breath ragged as she dialed a clerk she'd bribed for favors. "I need a warrant for Orion Tech's executive suite, Wells' office, now," she barked, her voice shaking with urgency. The clerk hesitated. "That's fast-tracked, Sarah. Risky." She cut him off. "Do it, or an innocent man's done." 30 minutes later, she had it. A judge's signature scrawled in haste, her lifeline to Tanya's clue. She rallied 2 deputies, their badges glinting as they sped to Orion's tower, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. The raid hit like a thunderclap, Sarah storming into Wells' office with deputies in tow, their boots echoing on. Polished floors as stunned staff gaped. Wells was out, his desk empty. But Sarah zeroed in on the safe behind a framed photo of him shaking hands with a senator. She cracked it with a code Tanya had slipped her weeks ago, a backup from her infiltration, and the door swung open, spilling files like blood from a wound. Bank statements, emails, contracts, all tying Wells to arms deals, Grayson's bribes, and the frame-ups of Jamal and Tanya. A memo sealed it, Wells ordering Rollins to neutralize Brooks, pin the hit, dated the night of the ambush. Sarah's hands shook as she bagged it, her voice fierce. "We've got them." Back in chambers, Judge Evans sat at a polished oak table, her glasses perched low, her red scarf stark against the dim light as Grayson and Sarah faced off. Grayson smirked, arms crossed, his drawl oily. "Your Honor, Brooks' arrest kills their case. She's a murderer. Her evidence is trash." Sarah slapped the safe's docks on the table, her voice trembling with rage. "This kills your case, Grayson. Orion's dirty, you're dirty, and you framed them both." Evans skimmed the papers, her brow furrowing, her pen tapping a furious beat. "Mr. Grayson, these allege you took bribes. Explain," he stammered, sweat beading on his brow, his swagger crumbling. "For this is nonsense fabricated." Evans cut him off, her voice ice. "We're done here, back to court." The session resumed, Sarah storming in with the files, her face flushed as she faced Evans. "Your Honor, New evidence from Orion Tech's safe proves prosecutorial misconduct and corporate conspiracy. She waved the docs, the jury's eyes widening as she detailed Wells's orders: Grayson's cash, the planted USB, the fake tape. Grayson leapt up, his face reddening. "Objection! This is a stunt, unverified." But Evans slammed her gavel. Her voice thunder. "Overruled! Sit down, Mr. Grayson." She turned to the jury, her glasses glinting. "This trial's halted pending investigation. You're dismissed until further notice." The gallery gasped, reporters scrambling. The jury's chatter a mix of shock and doubt as they filed out, their cold stares softening into confusion. Jamal straightened, his cuffs clinking, a spark of hope flickering as Sarah squeezed his arm, her whisper fierce. "We're close, Jamal. Hold on." He nodded, his chest heaving, daring to believe again, the weight of the frame lifting slightly. Grayson slumped, his fingers drumming a frantic beat, his mind racing to salvage his imploding career. He'd mocked Tanya, crowed over her arrest, but now the room buzzed with whispers of his downfall, Wells' docs a noose around his neck. Sarah gathered her notes, her pulse steadying, knowing Tanya's gambit had landed, even from a cell. But in Orion's tower, Preston Wells watched the raid's aftermath on a private feed, his silver hair disheveled, his pale eyes blazing as he smashed his Scotch glass against the wall. Rollins flinched, his buzz cut damp, his jowls quivering as Wells roared, "They've got my safe, that black bitch did this." His racism was a raw wound now, his tailored suit creasing with his rage as he dialed his cop contact, voice lethal. "Crash the courthouse, take Carter, Miles, anyone, end it now." He hung up, his thick fingers flexing, his grin returning, a predator cornered but feral. The docs were a gut punch, Grayson's exposure a wound, but he'd burn it all before losing. Tanya sat in a holding cell, her hoodie confiscated, her bloodied face unbowed, as she overheard a guard's radio crackle with Wells' orders. Her dark eyes narrowed, her mind racing, her training a steel core. She'd handed Sarah the key, but Wells's desperation was a wildfire, and she'd fight from here if she had to. Sarah's raid had cracked the system, but the collapse wasn't complete, and Wells's next strike loomed like a storm cloud. Grayson's arrogance, Wells's hate, they'd underestimated her again, and she'd make them pay even in chains. The courthouse trembled, the air thick with the scent of chaos, and she waited, a hunted warrior ready for the final blow. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse simmered in the late afternoon heat, the air in courtroom 12 heavy with the musk of sweat and tension as the recess stretched into an uneasy limbo. Jamal Carter sat at the defense table, his cuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights, his gaunt face flickering with a fragile hope sparked by Sarah's raid on Wells's safe. Sarah Miles paced beside him, her green eyes darting to the clock, her rumpled suit clinging to her frame as she clutched the damning files, their edges curling in the humidity. The jury lingered in the deliberation room, their chatter muted, behind thick doors, their minds wrestling with Grayson's exposure. Judge Carla Evans had retreated to chambers, her red scarf a memory as she pored over the motion to dismiss, the courthouse buzzing with a restless edge. Outside, the corridor erupted in chaos, glass shattering as three masked thugs in tactical gear stormed through the main entrance, their boots pounding the marble, assault rifles spitting fire. Screams pierced the air, clerks diving under desks, spectators scattering as bullets chewed the walls, plaster raining like ash. The lead thug, a hulking figure with a scarred jaw, barked orders, his voice a guttural snarl. "Carter and Miles! Now, no witnesses!" They were Wells' hired muscle, Orion's last gasp, their black vests bristling with ammo as they surged toward courtroom 12, their mission a racist purge to silence the truth. In the holding cell below, Tanya Brooks heard the gunfire, her dark eyes snapping to the ceiling, her bloodied face tensing as the guard's radio crackled with panic. "Shots fired, main floor!" She stood, her wrists chafing in cuffs, her hoodie gone, her torn shirt clinging to her frame. The guard fumbled his keys, his hands shaking. As he barked, "Stay put!" But Tanya's Secret Service training surged, her body coiling like a spring. She lunged as he turned, her elbow slamming his temple, his body crumpling with a dull thud. She snatched his keys, unlocking her cuffs, her fingers steady as she grabbed his baton and slipped out, her sneakers silent on the concrete. The courthouse was her battlefield now, and she'd fight to save Jamal. Upstairs, Sarah shoved Jamal under the table as the courtroom door exploded inward, wood splintering as the thugs stormed in, their rifles sweeping the room. "Where's Carter?" the scarred leader roared, his barrel swinging toward the gallery where stragglers dove for cover. Sarah's heart hammered, her voice a fierce whisper. "Stay down!" She grabbed a chair, hurling it at the stocky thug, its legs cracking against his skull, staggering him. The third, wiry and twitchy, fired wild, bullets punching the bench, splinters flying as Jamal flinched, his cuffs clinking. The scarred, one charged, his fist slamming Sarah's jaw, sending her sprawling, blood trickling from her lip as she gasped, "Run, Jamal!" Tanya burst through a side door, her baton a blur as she cracked the wiry thug's wrist, his rifle clattering as he howled. She spun, driving the baton into the stocky one's gut, doubling him over, her movements fluid, lethal, a warrior unleashed. The scarred leader turned, his rifle barking, but Tanya dove, rolling behind the witness stand as bullets chewed the wood. She popped up, hurling the baton, its end smashing his nose, blood spraying as he staggered. Jamal scrambled out, his cuffs, slowing him, but Tanya grabbed him, shoving him toward the exit. "Move!" she yelled, dragging Sarah up, her arm around her waist as they bolted, the thugs reeling in their wake. The corridor was a war zone, smoke curling from shattered lights, bodies slumped in corners as deputies returned fire, their pistols no match for the rifles. Tanya led them through a service hall, her breath ragged, her mind racing as she kicked open a stairwell door, the trio stumbling down, blood and sweat mingling on their skin. They hit the basement, piling into a maintenance closet, its walls lined with brooms and bleach, the air thick with dust. Sarah panted, her jaw swelling, her voice hoarse. What the hell was that? Tanya's eyes burned, her whisper fierce. "Wells, he's ending us." Jamal slumped against the wall, his cuffs clinking, his voice breaking. "I thought we'd won." Tanya gripped his shoulder, her tone steel. "Not yet. We're alive." In courtroom 12, Victor Grayson cowered behind his table, his gray suit wrinkled, his silver hair askew as the thugs retreated, their mission foiled. The safe's docks lay scattered, their ink a death knell as deputies stormed in, their shouts drowning the gunfire's echo. Grayson stood, his hands trembling, his smirk gone as he faced Judge Evans, who emerged from chambers, her red scarf stark, her glasses glinting with fury. "What is this madness, Mr. Grayson?" she demanded, her voice thunder as she waved the files. "Your bribes, Orion's orders, and now this?" He stammered, sweat soaking his collar. I didn't..." She cut him off, her gavel slamming. "You're done. Trials suspended. Investigations immediate." The jury, huddled in their room, peeked out, their faces pale as they saw the carnage, the docks, Grayson's collapse. Their chatter turned to gasps, their doubt shifting from Jamal to the man who'd spun their trust into lies. Grayson sank into his chair, his fingers clawing his hair, his career a smoking ruin. Wells' hit had backfired, exposing him raw, the jury witnessing his puppet strings snap. He'd mocked Tanya, crowed over her cuffs, but now the room buzzed with his downfall, her survival a blade in his gut. In Orion's tower, Preston Wells watched the feed, his silver hair wild, his pale eyes blazing as he smashed his desk, papers flying like shrapnel. Rollins flinched, his buzz cut damp, his jowls quivering as Wells roared, "They're still breathing!" His tailored suit creased, his racism a furnace as he dialed his cop contact, voice lethal. "Bomb threat, courthouse now! Clear it out!" He hung up, his thick fingers flexing, his grin a twisted mask. The assault had failed, Tanya's breakout a gut punch, but he'd stall justice yet, his empire teetering but unbowed. Minutes later, sirens wailed outside, a voice booming over. A megaphone, "Evacuate, bomb threat detected." The courthouse shuddered, deputies rushing in, herding staff and spectators out. Their shouts a cacophony as smoke lingered from the attack. Sarah, Jamal and Tanya slipped into the crowd, their breaths ragged, their bodies bruised but alive. Sarah clutched the safe's docks, her jaw throbbing, her voice fierce. "We've got enough to bury them." Jamal nodded, his cuffs clinking, a spark reigniting in his eyes. "They can't stop us now." Tanya's dark eyes scanned the chaos, her mind racing, her resolve a steel wall. "They'll try," she said, her voice low, knowing Wells. Hate wouldn't die quietly. Judge Evans emerged, her red scarf flapping as she barked orders, her glasses glinting with rage. "Secure the evidence, lock this down." Deputies swarmed, the jury hustled out, their faces a mix of terror and awe as they glimpsed Jamal alive, the docks in Sarah's hands a lifeline they'd weigh later. Grayson staggered into the throng, his pale blue eyes darting, his swagger a ghost as cops eyed him, whispers of arrest circling. The bomb threat cleared the building, stalling the verdict, Wells's desperation a shadow over their escape. Tanya led them into the street, her hoodie lost, her torn shirt a badge of survival as they vanished into Atlanta's sprawl, the courthouse, a smoking husk behind them. In his tower, Wells sipped a fresh scotch, his grin returning, his voice a rasp as he muttered, "Run all you want. I've got more." His racism was a live wire, his empire wounded but clawing, the bomb threat a stall to regroup. Tanya's breakout, Sarah's docks, they'd cracked his facade, but he'd burned the city before yielding. Jamal's hope flickered, Sarah's resolve hardened, and Tanya's fury burned, her mission a vow unbroken. The courthouse stood empty, its marbles scarred, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and betrayal, and the war raged on, its next blow looming like a storm on the horizon. The Atlanta skyline glittered under a bruised dusk, the air thick with the promise of rain, as Tanya Brooks sped through the city's outskirts in a stolen pickup, its engine growling like a wounded beast. Her torn shirt clung to her frame, blood crusted on her cheek from the courthouse chaos, her dark eyes locked on the road ahead. The safe's dock sat beside her, snatched from Sarah's hands as they'd split in the evacuation, their ink a weapon she'd wield tonight. She'd tracked Preston Wells to his private airstrip, a hunch confirmed by a tapped call from her burner, his voice rasping about a jet to Miami. Her Glock rested on her lap, her Secret Service resolve a steel core as she floored the gas. The courthouse assault a fresh scar driving her to end this. The airstrip loomed, a strip of concrete flanked by hangars, Wells's sleek jet idling under floodlights, its engines whining as a pilot prepped for takeoff. Tanya ditched the truck in a ditch, her sneakers hitting the gravel as she sprinted. Hoodie lost, her torn sleeves flapping like war flags. Wells stood by the jet's stairs, his silver hair wild, his tailored suit rumpled, a duffel of cash slung. Over his shoulder, his pale eyes glinted with a mix of fury and triumph, his thick fingers clutching a phone as he barked at Rollins, "Get me out now!" Tanya emerged from the shadows, her Glock raised, her voice cutting through the night. "It's over, Wells." He spun, his grin twisting into a snarl, his racism a raw wound as he spat, "You'll never stop us. Your kind never does." He dropped the duffel, pulling a pistol from his waistband, its barrel flashing as he fired wild, bullets kicking up dirt at her feet. Tanya dove behind a crate, her breath steady, her training a lifeline as she rolled, squeezing off 2 rounds, one grazing his thigh, blood blooming dark against his suit. He roared, staggering, but fired again, the shot pinging off metal as she lunged, tackling him to the ground, her elbow slamming his wrist, his gun skittering away. She pinned him, her knee on his chest, her Glock to his temple, her voice ice. "Talk!" Wells thrashed, his pale eyes blazing, his drawl a venomous rasp. "You're nothing, just a pawn. We own this city." Tanya yanked a recorder from her pocket, its red light blinking as she pressed it on, his words spilling like oil. "Carter's a scapegoat, Grayson's my dog, and you're dead anyway." She tightened her grip, her chokehold cutting his air, his face purpling as he gurgled, "White power runs this, always will." She eased off, letting him gasp, the tape capturing every racist syllable as she stood, kicking his gun into the dark. "That's enough," she said, her voice low, binding his wrists with his own belt, his empire a ruin at her feet. Back in the courthouse, dawn broke over a cordoned-off courtroom 12, the air thick with the scent of smoke and bleach as deputies swept the wreckage, Sarah Miles stood before Judge Carla Evans, her jaw bruised, her green eyes fierce as she played Tanya's recording, Wells' confession crackling through a speaker. Jamal sat beside her, his cuffs gone, his gaunt face lifting. With a hope he'd forgotten, the jury reassembled, their pencils flying as they heard Wells' rant, their disgust palpable. Grayson slumped in custody, his grey suit wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled as cops flanked him, his pale blue eyes darting, his arrest sealed by the safe's docks and Wells' words. Judge Evans rapped her gavel, her red scarf stark, her voice thunder. The evidence is irrefutable. Charges against Mr. Carter are dismissed. Mr. Grayson, you're remanded for corruption and conspiracy. The jury nodded, their faces a mix of relief and rage, their verdict unspoken but clear as they filed out, the courtroom buzzing with whispers of justice. Sarah hugged Jamal, her arms tight, her whisper fierce. "You're free." He blinked back tears, his voice breaking as he said, "Keisha's waiting." He stood, his borrowed suit jacket slipping off, a free man stepping into the light. Grayson's sobs a faint echo as cuffs snapped on his wrists, his career ash. Outside, Keisha waited in the lot, her swollen belly straining her dress, her arms wrapping Jamal tight as he emerged, their tears mingling as they clung to each other. The nightmare fading. Sarah watched, her bruised jaw throbbing, her chest swelling with a victory hard won. Tanya slipped in, her torn shirt a badge of war, her dark eyes meeting Sarah's with a nod. "Good work," she said, her voice low, handing over the safes. Docs, their ink a tombstone for Orion's lies. Sarah took them, her smile faint but real, knowing Tanya had carried them through hell. But as Jamal and Keisha walked away, Tanya lingered, her hand slipping into her pocket, pulling out her Secret Service badge, its gold flashing in the dawn. She flashed it to Sarah, her voice steady. "This wasn't just about Jamal. I've been undercover a year, targeting a racist cabal bigger than Orion. Wells was a spoke, not the wheel." Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching as Tanya tucked the badge away, her mission a shadow stretching beyond the trial. "They're still out there," Tanya said, her tone steel, her gaze distant, the war unfinished. In a jail cell miles away, Wells sat on a cot, his silver hair matted, his thigh bandaged, his pale eyes glinting with a twisted calm as he smirked. At a TV screen, Grayson's arrest looping on the news. His empire was gutted, his jet grounded, but his grin held a secret, a cog in a machine still turning. He'd lost, but others hadn't, and Tanya's fight loomed larger than she'd let on. His racism was a spark, not the fire, and he knew it'd burn again. Tanya slipped into the crowd, her torn shirt blending with the chaos, her Glock holstered, her mind racing with the next target. She'd won this round, freed Jamal, toppled Grayson, but the badge weighed heavy, a promise of battles unspoken. Sarah watched her go, her green eyes narrowing, sensing the depth of Tanya's war, a storm she'd only glimpsed. Jamal hugged Keisha tighter, their baby's kick a pulse of life, their freedom a fragile dawn. The courthouse stood scarred, its marble a testament to the fight, and Tanya vanished, a hunted warrior chasing a shadow bigger than they knew. Autumn leaves swirled through Atlanta's streets, the crisp October air a stark contrast to the humid hell of August as Jamal Carter stepped out of a modest duplex in East Point, his breath fogging in the morning chill. 3 months had passed. Since the trial, his cuffs a memory, his borrowed suit swapped for a flannel shirt and jeans, the sleeves rolled up as he carried a toolbox to a beat-up truck. Keisha stood in the doorway, their newborn daughter Aisha cradled in her arms, her swollen belly now a soft curve under a sweater, her smile warm as she waved him off to his new job at a local garage. The duplex was small, rented with savings, and a settlement from Orion Tech's collapse, but it was theirs, a fragile piece rebuilt from ash. Jamal waved back, his gaunt face filling out, his brown eyes bright with a hope he'd fought to reclaim. Inside the duplex, a TV flickered on the kitchen counter, its volume low as a news anchor's voice droned through the morning quiet. Breaking. News from Atlanta's federal courthouse. Assistant U.S. Attorney Victor Grayson has been released on bail, pending an internal review of alleged evidence tampering in the Jamal Carter case. Jamal froze, his toolbox clattering to the floor, his heart lurching as Keisha turned, her eyes widening. The anchor continued. Grayson claims new evidence proves he was framed by Secret Service agent Tanya Brooks, accusing her of planting documents to secure his conviction. The screen cut to Grayson outside the jail, his gray suit crisp, his silver hair slicked back, his pale blue eyes glinting with a smugness Jamal thought he'd buried. "I'm innocent," Grayson drawled. Her victim of a rogue agent's vendetta. Keisha clutched Aisha tighter, her voice trembling. "How's he out after everything?" Jamal sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he rubbed his face, the weight of freedom cracking like thin ice. "They can't do this," he muttered, his mind flashing to Tanya's badge, her quiet exit, the cabal she'd hinted at. The news shifted, a grainy photo of Tanya splashing across the screen, her dark eyes fierce, labeled wanted, suspected of evidence fabrication. Jamal's stomach twisted, his whisper barely audible. "She saved me, and now this?" Keisha knelt beside him, her hand on his, her voice fierce despite the fear. "We'll fight it. She'll fight it." But the room felt smaller, the walls closing in as Grayson's grin loomed, a ghost resurrected. Miles away, in a nondescript motel off Interstate 20, Tanya Brooks hunched over a burner laptop, her torn shirt swapped for a black jacket, her bloodied past a faint scar on her cheek. Her dark eyes narrowed at the same broadcast, her pulse steady, but her fury a live wire as she watched Grayson's release unfold. She'd vanished after Wells's takedown, her Secret Service cover blown by necessity, her mission shifting to the shadows as she tracked the cabal she'd warned Sarah about. Now this, a gut punch she hadn't seen coming. Her fingers tapped the keys, pulling encrypted files from a hidden server, her jaw tightening as she pieced it together. Forged ballistics, doctored logs, a paper trail pinning her as the villain, all stamped with a shadowy group's mark, the same one she'd chased for a year. A knock rattled the door, sharp and urgent, and Tanya drew her Glock, her body coiling as she peered through the blinds. Sarah Miles stood outside, her green eyes bloodshot, her bruised jaw healed but her face etched with exhaustion. Tanya opened the door, her voice low. "You shouldn't be here." Sarah stepped in, clutching a manila envelope, her voice shaking. "Grayson's out, Tanya. They're saying you framed him and they're coming for Jamal again." She dropped the envelope, papers spilling, legal motions to retry Jamal, citing tainted evidence. Tanya skimmed them, her lips pressing thin, her mind racing. "It's not just Grayson," she said, her tone steel. "It's them, the ones I told you about. They've got pull, deep pull." Sarah sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. "Who are they?" Tanya holstered her Glock, her dark eyes distant as she paced, her voice a quiet storm. "A network, white supremacists with money and badges buried in the system. Wells was their front, Orion a tool. I've been hunting them since before Jamal's case and they're hitting back." She pulled a note from her pocket, sliding it to Sarah, her handwriting sharp. "This isn't over. They'll come for you too." Sarah read it, her breath catching, the weight of Tanya's war sinking in. "What do we do?" she whispered. Tanya's gaze hardened, her reply a vow. "I keep fighting, you keep Jamal safe." In a maximum security cell, Preston Wells lounged on a cot, his silver hair matted, his tailored suit swapped for an orange jumpsuit, his thigh scar a dull ache under bandages. A TV bolted to the wall looped Grayson's release, and Wells smirked, his pale eyes glinting with a twisted calm as he watched his pawn walk free. A guard slipped him a burner phone, its screen glowing as he dialed, his raspy voice low. "She's still out there, but Grayson's loose. Keep the pressure on Carter." The voice on the other end, smooth and cold, replied, "We've got more moves. Brooks won't last." Wells hung up, his grin widening, his racism a spark in a larger fire. He was a cog, not the wheel, and the machine still turned, its gears grinding for revenge. Back in East Point, Jamal paced the duplex, his toolbox forgotten, his hands clenched as Keisha rocked Aisha, her lullaby trembling with fear. The news cut to an expert, a slick white man in a suit claiming, "Brooks' actions suggest a rogue operative, possibly tied to extremist groups herself." Jamal's fist slammed the counter, his voice breaking. "She's no extremist. She's the only one who cared." Keisha stood, her eyes fierce, her whisper urgent. "Then we trust her, Jamal. She's out there fighting still." He nodded, his chest heaving, but the TV's lies gnawed at him, Grayson's freedom a noose tightening again. Tanya slipped out of the motel, her black jacket blending into the night, her Glock holstered, her laptop slung over her shoulder as Sarah drove off, the envelope a lifeline for Jamal. She vanished into Atlanta's underbelly, her dark eyes scanning the shadows, her mind a furnace of strategy and rage. Grayson's bail was a slap, the frame-up a masterstroke, but the cabal's reach was deeper than she'd feared, a hydra with heads still hidden. Her badge was a ghost now, her mission a lone war against a racist beast that wouldn't die with Wells or Orion. She'd freed Jamal, toppled Grayson, but the victory was ash, a prelude to a fight she couldn't escape. In a downtown high-rise, a shadowed figure watched the news, his suit pristine, his hands clasped behind his back, a silver ring glinting with a subtle insignia. He was older, his hair white, his face unlined but cold, a man Wells had answered to, a puppet master in the cabal Tanya hunted. He dialed a secure line, his voice smooth as silk. "Grayson's out, Carter's shaken, Brooks is isolated. Move phase 2. The line clicked off, his grin faint, his power a web stretching beyond Atlanta, its threads woven with hate and control. Jamal's peace, Tanya's fight. They were pawns in a game he'd played for decades, and he'd crushed them yet. Jamal stood at the duplex window, the street quiet. Aisha's soft breaths a lifeline as Keisha slept beside her. The TV, off but its echo loud in his mind. Grayson's smirk, Tanya's wanted poster, they haunted him. His freedom a mirage as the cabal loomed, unseen but felt. Tanya's note burned in his pocket, a warning and a plea, and he whispered to the dark, "I ain't giving up." But the night pressed in, Atlanta's skyline a jagged promise of more battles, and Tanya ran alone, a hunted warrior in a war without end. This gripping tale unveils profound lessons about resilience, justice, and the pervasive shadow of systemic racism. Jamal Carter's journey from a wrongfully accused worker to a free man highlights the power of unwavering determination against overwhelming odds. His fight wasn't just against a corrupt prosecutor or a vengeful corporation, but a deeply entrenched system that thrives on prejudice, showing that innocence alone isn't enough. Truth demands relentless advocates like Tanya Brooks. Tanya's transformation from an unnoticed observer to a hunted Secret Service operative underscores the courage required to confront power head-on, even at personal cost. Her story teaches us that justice often comes through sacrifice, and one person's stand can ripple through a broken system. The tale also exposes the fragility of victory in the face of hidden forces. Grayson's release and the cabal's persistence reveal that racism isn't just individual acts, but a network of privilege, ready to strike back when challenged. It's a stark reminder that progress is a battle, not a finish line, and vigilance is key. Sarah Miles's tenacity proves that allies matter. Her refusal to abandon Jamal turned the tide, showing solidarity can amplify the fight for right. Finally, the story warns of arrogance's downfall. Grayson's mockery blinded him to Tanya's strength, a fatal flaw that crumbled his world. What does this leave us with? A call to question who holds power, to support those fighting unseen. Wars and to never assume the surface tells the whole story. So what do you think? Can one person's truth topple a system? Or are we all just pawns in a bigger game? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this moved you, and subscribe. And share to keep these stories alive. Thanks for joining this journey. Here's to courage, truth, and a world where justice prevails.